Okay, so our company is Expedia Group. I'm Miley Smith.
I'm Catherine Palmer.
I'm Haley Stewart.
And I'm Jack Thompson.
Okay, so to start off with a little background about Expedia, they were founded on October 22nd of 1996, and the founder was Rich Barton, and it started in Redmond, Washington. It also started as a division of Microsoft. They kind of started this online website, but then later in 1999, they kind of split off as their own company, but Microsoft still owns a large portion of them. The current CEO is Peter M. Kern. He became CEO in 2020 and currently still is. And the headquarters are also in Seattle, Washington. Another important thing to know about them is they changed their name uh, from Expedia Inc. to Expedia Group Inc. in March of 2018. And this was just due to confusion with one of the companies that they owned, which was just Expedia. Because Expedia Group Inc. was kind of like the bigger division that owned all the other companies.
Some of the services that Expedia provides. So the way Expedia works is it's a platform company. So instead of providing their own specific service to customers, they find other travel agencies and connect them with the customers. So some of the things that they help customers find are flights, hotels, car rentals, attractions like tours and scenery to explore while you're in a location. So I guess the way it would work is you'd go onto the website at expedia.com and you type in the place that you want to travel to, and then you select the dates that you would want to go, and they'd list all the different optional flights that you could take during this time. So you can decide whether you want the one that's the most convenient time, or if you want the one that is the cheapest price, or if you want one without a layover, etc. And then after you select your flight, you'd select car rental, and they give you all the different options for that as well. And you'd also accept or select a hotel, places that you would want to stay, and they even give you option to choose things to do. And they give you all the different possibilities in the location that you're going to.
Expedia Groups owns a variety of different companies, and so they own. Sorry, oh, that's okay.
Wait, okay, so sorry.
They own Expedia, Hotels.com, Vrbo, Travelocity, Hotwire, Orbitz, eBookers, Cheap Tickets, CarRentals.com, Expedia Cruises, What If, Trivago, Expedia Group's Media Solutions, and Expedia Group Partner Solutions. And so the common theme here is different travel agencies, but they have a variety, whether it's for booking plane tickets or car rentals or cruises. They kind of have a diverse platform that they have.
And just to go over some of the achievements and recent awards that Expedia Inc. or Expedia Group Inc. pardon me, has achieved in the past and also very recently, just to kind of sum it up and show a difference between other travel agency companies. The first one we have is in 2015, they were awarded with the world's leading online travel agency. In 2020, they were awarded the #1 travel company in sales. We can see that in the chart that is attached to the bottom right. We have a pie chart of all of the top travel companies in the world by their sales purely. And as you can see in the blue color, Expedia Group is #1. They're also awarded in 2017 top of the 30 best workplaces in the technology industries. And their revenue in 2020 was $9.6 billion, which is a 126% increase than the year before them.
So again, my name is Catherine Palmer. The topic that I researched regarding the Expedia Group company is what are the most important resources the company needs and how scarcity will affect the future of the company. So like we mentioned before, Expedia is a platform company, so they don't actually provide their own tangible service. They provide the services of other companies in a platform to customers, which is why it's called a platform company. So because of this, Expedia is entirely reliant on the resources that other companies provide. They have a nationwide market share of 13% in the industry, in the travel industry. But specifically in the online hotel booking industry, they have a 30.1% market share. And this specific sub-industry is their largest. So some of the available resources that they provide, like we mentioned earlier, are the flights, the hotel bookings, the travel attractions, and the car rentals. Because Expedia does not create its own product, it has less power to control how much resources there are out there. So like a car industry or a car rental service, if they had a scarcity going on, they could better prepare for that by creating more cars. Buying more cars. And they could probably do that pretty quickly. However, Expedia doesn't purchase cars, so they're completely reliant on other companies of purchasing cars. But it also gives Expedia a little bit more flexibility because they're not reliant entirely on one company's total amount of cars. They're reliant on the entire industries of cars because they can ask any car rental company if they can use their cars. And so Expedia is more reliant, but they're also more flexible because of this, which can kind of affect them in the way scarcity works. So if there's an industry-wide shortage, Expedia doesn't really have the power to create more. But when it comes to short-term shortages, they have more flexibility. So yeah, we talked about that. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so most recently, Expedia has actually experienced the opposite of scarcity. They've been enduring a surplus, and that's because of COVID-19. COVID set everybody home. People weren't going on business trips anymore because companies didn't want that kind of liability. People were staying home because they were scared of COVID. And then in some cases, people were not even able to travel because of government restrictions, or there wasn't the means to travel. For example, here in Hawaii, for a while there was a complete shutdown on the island, and there was no flights coming in and out of the state. And so people couldn't even travel if they wanted to. Because there's no flights, the hotels weren't being filled, there weren't any car rentals being borrowed or used, and the tour attractions, those were being shut down as well. Nobody was going to them. And so Expedia didn't have the power to fix this at all because it was a worldwide pandemic. And this is a good example of what market failure looks like. So before COVID-19, however, Expedia's yearly revenue had been growing year after year. So starting in 2020, in 2020, they had 134 million, but as they increased all the way to 2019, they ended at 12 billion. But when COVID hit, they were cut more than half in their revenue, and they went down to 5 billion. And then they increased by 65% in one more year after that to 2021, and they had an 8 billion in revenue. So that was a pretty dramatic increase from 5 billion to 8 billion. However, it didn't recover the entire amount that they had lost the year before that. So Expedia did actually anticipate some of these changes that were coming. They wrote in their 2019 10K report that they knew that major macroeconomic changes were coming, and it was going to decrease the needs for their online platform. They said in the report, the growth rate was continuing at a slower pace than prior years, though, and they thought that this trend would continue. So yeah, so in the last few years, the growth rate was like slowing down, and so they thought that trend was going to continue. But they obviously didn't anticipate the huge changes that COVID would take. Otherwise, they wouldn't have lost quite so much money. And so they kind of were talking in some of the reports that they were expecting growth to still occur, even though the growth rate was slowing down. One article they said was, in 2020, approximately 50% of US and European leisure and unmanaged corporate travel expenditures are expected to occur online. So they were talking about the growth that was going to be happening. And then they continued on in this report about how they were looking for, they saw some really big opportunities for growing in the Pacific Rim areas because there was a lack of travel there, and they knew that the Pacific area was really beautiful and that offered a great opportunity for growth. However, now after COVID and everything, the Pacific areas, most of the Pacific Island countries have been shut down entirely because of COVID, and so there's no opportunities for growth there. Expedia thought their growth rate would continue to slow down. My opinion is that in the next 3 to 5 years, Expedia is probably going to experience a little bit of scarcity. And if they don't experience scarcity, I think it will be close to that. And the reason I say that is because they have, they experienced a surplus, and because everyone was locked away for a couple of years, I think that once all the restrictions, and I actually think this is probably already going on, once the restrictions are entirely lifted all across the globe, I think there's going to be a surplus of travel. People are going to be more anxious to get out. Businesses are going to be more than ready to connect with businesses across the world, and they're going to be sending people out. And so I think it's likely that Expedia is going to experience some scarcity, especially since there are a lot of travel companies that have experienced a lot of losses and had to shut down. And so there's not as many resources out there anymore. And so once everything opens back up again, I imagine there's not going to be enough resources. And so before COVID hit, though, Expedia was talking about in their 2019 report, their 10K report, they were talking about how they were anticipating that they would continue to grow, but at a slower pace. I don't really know how that's going to look in the long term, but as for the next 3 to 5 years, I think that they're going to have some large growth increases from their, so they went back to 5 billion in revenue. I think they're going to increase almost to or close to the amount that they had before at around 12 billion.
Okay, so I'll be talking about how the demand and supply impact this company's operations. So as Catherine mentioned before, Expedia was slowly increasing and they were doing pretty well before COVID. But as soon as COVID hit, demand plummeted and there was absolutely no demand for any travel. And so as you can reference in the stock chart, you can see that this is the last like a little over a year or 2 years, month by month, the stock prices. And as soon as COVID hit in March of 2020, Expedia's stock just dropped way down. And because there was no demand at all, there was no need for any operations. And so their operations just shut down and they had nothing going on. But over the last year, and especially the last like 6 months, countries have slowly started to come out of lockdown and people have slowly been able to travel again, which has made demand rise again. And as you can see on the stock chart, they've been slowly increasing, actually doing better than they were before. Demand is so incredibly high right now because everyone all at once just is wanting to travel after being stuck for so long and not being able to. But the only problem with this is that the supply is not rising with the demand. There's still things due to COVID-19, such as like social distancing, where every other hotel room can only be open, or cars need to be cleaned for longer, so they can only be not be rented as often, which is causing there to not be enough supply, and this is causing a shortage with a high demand and a low supply. And then also just with other conflicts going around in the world, like other wars going on and stuff, you know, fuel prices are really high for flights and for gas for cars, and um, just everything is extremely high. And also with which is also adding to the shortage. And because of this, companies such as Expedia are able to price their products and services extremely high. Um, and they're also able to do this because the demand is so high and the customers and consumers are willing to pay that price. For my recommendations for Expedia would be to not overprice their services and products so incredibly high. They have the opportunity right now, but I would suggest doing it just enough to make a profit. Of course, they're going to be higher than they originally were before COVID, just due to everything. But I think if they try to you know, take this advantage that they have and just like squeeze every penny out of their consumers, that it's gonna just cause a bad rep with them, and that when things start to get better, that people aren't gonna want to go back to them. And also, I just think that having a low price will attract a larger percentage of the market right now. And also, they can use it to their advantage when advertising. You know, letting their customers know that they're giving the best price they can and that they're cheaper than their competitors will also help them out a lot. Um, Also, before COVID, Expedia started this savings plan to simplify their operations and to make things just more efficient and a lot cheaper, which actually helped them out in the long run because COVID happened shortly after they implemented this. And so they had saved a little bit of money and time, but of course, COVID was very detrimental um, to all their profits. But I think if they continue to do this, just continue with that savings plan and making the operations as simple as possible, this will help them save a lot of money. And also it'll give the more potential for supply to rise, especially with the shortage going on right now. If operations costs are a lot lower, then they can create more supply and then they'll have more product to sell. And with the demand being so high, they can make a lot more profit with that. So yeah, I just think those are the two main recommendations I have. I think this shortage is going to continue for quite a while. It might be another year or two before it even starts to slow down. So just don't overprice the products too much and just continue with their savings plan on operations.
So my section was on how the demand and supply elasticity impacts this company's operations. And for Expedia, the COVID-19 pandemic had a really large impact on both the quantity demand and the quantity supply elasticity for Expedia. And so their supply and their demand are both really reactive to changes in the prices from their vendors. So during COVID, or just in general, when prices rise or prices fall for different hotels or different flights, Expedia takes a big hit with that as well. Their supply and their demand will change a lot based on the different vendors' prices. And so when the consumer sees really high prices, they are less likely to engage with Expedia's services. And oftentimes they'll either take their money to a different travel agency website, or a lot of people opt to take their money and just do their own research and find their own prices for their flights and their hotels, and they just do it all separately instead of combining it with an agency like Expedia. And when these prices continue to fluctuate, then the supply of Expedia is also reactive. So a lot of times when the prices go really low, then people are going to be more likely to buy the Expedia or use Expedia services, and then there will be less supply to go around, because even though the service that Expedia offers isn't a physical object, it is like indirectly about like plane tickets and hotel rooms and things that have a limited supply. And And then in this graph, we can see that Expedia sales are increasing. However, there was a big drop in their sales during COVID. And so they've kind of fluctuated up and down throughout the years. But once COVID happened, their sales completely plummeted and they weren't making any money because people weren't able to travel. And then once travel restrictions started being lifted in certain places and COVID began to die down a little bit, then their sales skyrocketed because a lot of people were ready to get out and to travel more. And so the COVID-19 pandemic did have a really large impact on the elasticity of both the quantity demand and the quantity supply. And so in doing my research, I thought that a solution for this elasticity would be for Expedia to continue to increase their rewards programs. Kind of like how Miley said, they have a couple of programs in place right now, but if they will continue to use those and give people motivation to use their website rather than to book things on their own, then they can make more sales and hopefully they can increase their sales during lower times where less people are using their website.
All right, and the last section that I had was how the economic functions of the government affect Expedia Inc. I'm going over these. There's a lot of functions that the government provide economically that play a big role in a lot of organizations, a lot of industries around the world. Some of the big ones that affect Expedia are promoting competition and taxing the company on things that they do. With the promoting of competition, this forces Expedia, not really forces, but this encourages Expedia to lower prices and encourages them to find more innovation. And another one that we found was create a greater quality of their goods. Now, these things have been seen in their company. They've lowered their prices and services to search prices. A lot of their things that they're able to help connect people with. One of the big things that Expedia is known for in their sales is trying to help customers find what's reliable, but also what's cheapest, the most bang for their buck, some would say. With the more innovation, you can see this in their easy to use web interface, their mobile app, and the lists of activities and attractions for travel. All of these things Expedia has created and done a lot of research into. They even have teams for these specific things in order to provide that innovation that people look for when they're trying to go through the sometimes stressful parts of traveling the world and experiencing new places. The greater quality of goods can be seen as Expedia takes that time in order to provide that background and check up on these hotels and these car rentals and these services that they're providing so that they don't just give someone, a random thing that could cause them a negative output when they're looking for fun and they're looking for that leisure. With the taxing, this helps Expedia to manage their funds more wisely, whether it be a taxing on the income of their products, the inputs that they receive, or it's a taxing on charging people for the service that they provide. This helps Expedia learn to figure out how their funds can be used effectively as they try to get money out of it and try to grow as a company. So the projection for the next 3 to 5 years, looking into Expedia Group, not only just looking into them itself, but looking at the reports that they've released to the public and looking at things that other reviewers and other sources have written about them. One thing that really caught my eye was the new sustainable efforts that Expedia has been pushing. On the right is a little statement that they released, and it just simply says, if done sustainably, travel can connect us culturally, emotionally, and physically. It opens our eyes, minds, and hearts, all while providing positive economic impacts and working to lower environmental effects. Now, this new sustainable effort is going to, I believe, help them in the next 3 to 5 years, seeing that a lot of the government protections are enforced on that environment. One of the key economic functions of the government is to protect the environment. And so with a big company and a big industry such as Expedia with traveling, in order for them to continue to grow and continue to help out those around them with their services, it's going to be very crucial that they hang true to these sustainable efforts, as they can go hand in hand with what the government is already working to accomplish. Another thing that they need to keep their mind open for is the after effects of COVID-19 on international travel. This is something that my partners have already talked about a little bit, as you know, COVID has played a huge role in everything for the past couple of years, but especially with travel, whether it be people are now excited to get out and travel more since they haven't been able to, or whether it's there's a lot of bans and there's a lot of limitations on the travel industry today. These are things that Expedia Group is going to have to focus on and going to have to figure out how to navigate through, since travel is essentially their entire company. And lastly, some of the things that I guess some of my recommendations. One big one, in order for them to continue on into the future, continue to keep growing, is I called it just becoming a household company. Just because for me doing the research, I cannot understand what this company does. And I've traveled quite a bit myself, but I've never heard of Expedia Group. And the only company that they own that I've relatively heard of was Trivago. So I think one thing that can become helpful to them is trying to spread their word and trying to get more people to come to know them, come to know the company name, and have it be used more in the home. Another thing that I recommend, which would also help them to do that, would be to increase in advertising and brand ambassadors. This does require money, it does require funds on their end, but this is something that can help them grow, not only in their money and in their revenue coming in from the company, but in their size, and is able to help get the word out on what their company is there to do.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.